Hi everyone and welcome back to today's lesson. I'm going to talk you through the exam question you're going to answer on Friday or any time this week. You can do the exam whenever you want to, but today we're going to plan it. I would like you to take photographs of your plan and send them to me with your typed answer, okay? So if you can type the answer up, that would be brilliant because it's much easier to mark. So let's get going. So here's the question. And I'm going to ask you where you've seen this type of question before. You know it is paper 1 of your literature exam, GCSE literature exam, which is Shakespeare in the 19th century novel. You're given an extract and asked to answer a question. You're given 2 bullet points, the biggest difference being that you'll have spent 1 year developing your analytical skills since then and creating a language toolkit to use when you're analysing. So you now know all about lexis and semantics, grammar, discourse, pragmatics and phonology. So this should be easier for you than your GCSE was, because you know a lot more now than you did then, and you did it when you were doing GCSE. So let's have a look at the question and start to unpick it. Remember, you'll have the novel in the exam with you, so you can use the novel. It's an open book exam. There'll be no notes in the novel. It'll be a completely clean copy. But if you're going to succeed and do really well, you need to know the novel well before you go in there. So the question's asking you to explore the significance of Offred's relationship with Nick in the novel. And then it tells you, it gives you these 2 bullet points. And what we're thinking about here is, how's a relationship presented in the extract? Where else in the novel could you write about? And what methods does Atwood use, okay, to create this fantasy world? So your initial thoughts on the extract. Here is how it goes. He opens the door. He's in his shirt sleeves, his shirt untucked, hanging loose. He's holding a toothbrush or a cigarette or a glass of something with something in it. He has his own little stash up here, black market stuff, I suppose. He's always got something in his hand, as if he's been going on about his life as usual, not expecting me, not waiting. Maybe he doesn't expect me or wait. Maybe he has no notion of the future and does not bother a day to imagine it. Is it too late, I say? He shakes his head for no. It's understood between us by now that it is never too late, but I go through the ritual politeness of asking. It makes me feel more in control, as if there is a choice, a decision that could be made one way or the other. He steps aside and I move past him and he closes the door. Then he crosses the room and he closes the window. After that he turns out the light. There is not much talking between us anymore, not at this stage. Already I'm half out of my clothes. We save the talking for later. So your initial thoughts? What's important about what could Offred's relationship with Nick mean? What could it possibly be? And the next 3 slides that I'm going to show you are advice from the exam board on how to answer the question, the sort of things they'd expect you to include. So assessment objective 1, okay, use terminology. There's a slide at the very end of this presentation which has all the terminology on that Mrs. Fitzpatrick gave you when talking about Paris. It's the same terminology. There'll be some slightly different, some you might want to add to it. But you need to use terminology. You need to think about your language levels as well. And then thirdly, you need to write formally, and you need to develop all of your ideas. So you need to have an argument going through your essay, something you're trying to convince the person who's listening to you. Then you're going to analyse the ways in which meanings are shaped in texts. Okay, so you're using the language levels here to shape your response. Choose 3 language levels and focus on those. Don't try to do everything, all of the language levels. Just go for 3 of them and use those to shape your response, okay? And then finally you've got AO3. You're going to write formally and develop your ideas, structure your response, okay? You're going to include this context. You're going to include the context for your novel. And this is both the genre of it and then also the context in which Atwood wrote the novel, what was happening when she wrote the novel, and what's happening now that's still relevant, that makes it relevant, okay? So you're thinking about genre, fantasy, dystopian, speculative, but you're also thinking about your production and reception, okay? 1980s feminism, for example. So to respond to the question well, this sums it up. You need to think about which of the language levels are most appropriate. You need to answer the question, show you know the whole novel, and include detailed analysis of the genre and context of the novel. Okay. What I'm going to do is model one way of planning. You might plan very differently, but you might actually find this way of planning useful. And what I would say is it doesn't matter how you plan, but you must plan, okay? To begin, your plan may look a bit like this. You're looking at Nick and Offred's relationship, you're looking at the extract, the rest of the novel, and the genre. So it starts like that, okay? And this is in the extract, okay? And here's point one. In the extract, Offred is narrator. She's a homodiegetic narration, it's a homodiegetic narration, and these are the three things that leads you to, okay? So you've got the use of present tense, the use of conjunction, and the use of adverb of time. And you've got your quotations in there as well. So you've got those three things that you would use to expand when you're writing about the narrative voice. And of course the narrative voice is one of Atwood's methods that she uses. So it's a really interesting and fruitful line to go down. So there's point one. Point two. And there are four different examples here. You're thinking about the risky nature of Offred and Nick's relationship and the lack of apparent emotional closeness. There is an entire focus on sex in the relationship. You don't see them as loving, as romantic, nothing. It's just pure sex for them. And here you've got Nick's body language, that single clause sentences, direct speech, but it's very limited, and the material verb processes. So you've got those, you've got quotations to support them, and you think about that. You don't necessarily need to include all of these, but for your plan you put in everything you can possibly think of before you start to narrow it down. Finally, point three, and you only need about 3 decent points that you've expanded on here, is Offred's restricted narration in terms of Nick's thoughts. She doesn't know what's going on in Nick's mind, and she also is very wary of Nick and what's motivating him. She knows what's driving her, but she doesn't know what's driving him. And you've got this repeated use of the modal adverb maybe, conveying this lack of certainty. So you've got quotations again there. So you've got point, quotation, and then you're going to add to that and expand on it, okay? So you should have ended up with something like this. You've got your 3 points, your examples of them, and everything that's going on there. But there are 2 things we still need to add. We need to add context, and we need to think about the rest of the novel. So slides 13 to 15 are going to show you how I would plan to include context, okay? So initially here's the context, some ideas that you could write about. Elements of dystopian fantasy fiction and the way that the relationship is limited by the Gilead regime. You've got this dystopian setting where characters are fearful and secretive. Men's and women's relationships are depicted as unnatural in the novel, and that's because of this totalitarian regime. You've got the influences on Atwood of 20th century repressive regimes, the influences of feminism, and the influences of other dystopian novels and their portrayal of relationships. So if you know 1984, for example, you could write about the relationship that Winston has with his girlfriend. Or you could not write about it, but mention it in passing. You've got relevant references to literary critical and non-academic readings from a variety of theoretical stances. And I've sent you recently some reading that I asked you to do about Atwood, so you could include that. You could include the fact, and it would be particularly useful for context, that one, okay? Because it's talking about Trump and the new world that we found ourselves in and why perhaps the book was serialised. So slides 13 to 15, like I say, are going to show you how I'd plan to include context. So for the first point that I was going to make, which is Offred as a narrator. You've got this dystopian setting and characters are fearful and secretive. So you've got this all sorts of secretive stuff going on, the conjunctions. It's not just one memory. This is something that's happening again and again and again. But you can't bring yourself to tell you about that, okay? It's happened often, but it's been kept a secret. Okay, so there's where I'd weave context into the first point. And what I'd say about context is you do need to weave it in all the way through. Second one is elements of dystopian fantasy fiction. The relationship is completely limited by the regime in Gilead, and the relationship is somewhat unnatural. Okay, so that fits in with this point. Finally, you've got this Offred being in control of the narrative. We're getting her side of the story and just her side of the story. She also controls when they meet, and the influences of feminism are strong here. Offred is in control of this novel. She's in control of the reader. She even talks about telling you stories, and she's in control of Nick as well. So you're now going to end up with this really detailed plan, which has got your 3 points, examples for them, and then the context that you'd weave into each point. And like I say, don't tack the context on. Weave it in there the best you can, okay? So what we're left with is where else in the novel. So you have to weave this in the same way. And your question is how the relationship is shaped. What I'd say is what you're looking at is how the relationship is shaped by being in Gilead. It's a fictional relationship. It's an imaginary world. And how is that influenced? The extract you've got is from chapter 41. And there's a really, really important part just before the extract, which you probably will have read because you've gone back to chapter 41, skimmed it and thought, okay, then when Offred's talking about telling the story, and she's talking about controlling the narrative and controlling what's going on, and she's a bit ashamed of what she's doing, but she still goes ahead and does it. However, that's not really going to take you to get a really high mark. It's talking about the same place that the extract comes from and the one elsewhere in the novel. And I think perhaps what I'd look at is how the relationship is shaped by Gilead. So starting with the first meeting in chapter 4 and ending with chapter 46 when Nick helps Offred to escape. And she's still wary of him, she still doesn't know whether she can trust him, and yet she does trust him because she goes ahead and escapes. She follows his instructions because he's the one who comes to tell her to go with the eyes who've come for her, and tells her that they're actually Mayday rather than who they purport to be. So she does. So this relationship evolves throughout the course of the novel, and that's what I'd look at. Now you've got a very detailed plan. And what I'd say to you, what you need to do now is return to the question and decide what your overarching idea can be. And I'd like to point out here, your question is explore the significance of Offred's relationship with Nick in the novel. Now, normally you'd think significant would mean importance, but it doesn't in the exam questions. It means what different things could the relationship represent. And I think that Offred's relationship with Nick offers Offred power, freedom, some autonomy, she can decide when she sees him, defiance, it certainly allows her to defy the regime, and an opportunity to rebel. And that's what I'd put in my introduction. And then as I was writing my 3 key points, I'd return to these ideas about power, freedom, autonomy and everything else as I'm developing my argument. So what I'm trying to prove to my reader is that that's what I want to do. That's what I want to tell you about. And I'm going to prove to you that I'm right in telling you that. Now, if you want to, you can use this plan. If you don't want to, you can plan your own. I'm quite happy with it. But remember, if you do use this plan, I'd like you to have written it out in your own handwriting and developed it somewhat. Okay, because this has been a really, really fast talk through how you'd plan. So you might want to go back now and pause in certain places and make notes. But make sure you take a photograph of your plan and send that with your typed essay. Hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.